Year 12. So today we're going to be looking at skill acquisition, and we're going to start off by looking at the classification of skills. So classification of skills includes the precision of the movement. So we're looking at our fine motor skills, and we're also looking at our gross motor skills. So I think last week a few of you were saying big and small. So our big motor skills are our gross motor skills, which use our big muscles. So that includes kicking a football or doing a netball pass in netball, for example, chest pass in netball. And then we also have our fine motor skills, which include writing or perhaps throwing a dart. When we're classifying skills, we're also looking at the organisation of the task. Okay, so for example, discrete skills have a clear start and end point. It's very clear, a clear beginning and a clear end. So this could include throwing a ball or performing a dive or just throwing this pencil into the wall. That wasn't very good technique, but you got the idea. Then we have our continuous skills. So we have our running, we have our swimming, we've got our cycling. There's quite a few examples. So that's when the end of one movement is the beginning of the next. So the end of one movement is the beginning of the next. So if I'm running, here is the begin of one movement. Sorry, the start of one movement, the end of the movement, the beginning of the next. Okay, so I'm running along. This movement pattern is continuous. So as I finish this, I start this. I finish this, I start this. Okay, I'm swimming. So I finish doing this, and then I start doing this. I finish doing this. Okay, you get the idea. Terrible technique. And then we've got our serial skills. So that includes a series of discrete motor skills where they're put together in a chain. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the information processing model, which helps us to understand how players and athletes obtain new skills, or learn new skills, should I say. So it all starts off with here, the input. And when we're talking about input, we're talking about specific cues that players or athletes pick up, which then help them to resolve movement problems with movement solutions. So movement solutions being particular skills. So we've got here our cues, and we pick up these particular cues based on the signals or sensors that our sensory organs pick up. So we've got our sensory organs, seeing and touching. Okay, so as a result of something that we hear, see or touch, this then gives us a cue, which then helps us to make a decision about the appropriate movement solution to then use. Okay, so an example of a cue, and this is in your book as well, includes, for example, where is the opponent, where is the ball, in which direction is the wind coming from, or how hard was the ball hit, what angle is the ball coming from, and we've got here, where is the sun in relation to myself. So say, for example, in the previous video, the Ronaldo video, Ronaldo was picking up on particular cues based on things that he was seeing, which then helped help him to make a decision, and then alter his degrees of freedom, so his degrees of freedom being his limbs, in order to solve that movement pattern. Or, for example, in a game of tennis or in a game of table tennis, you see the ball coming at you in a particular angle at a particular speed, and you decide to do a forehand stroke or a backhand push. So that, once again, you're getting these different cues through hearing, seeing and touching. You're making a decision, and then you're acting on that decision by using a specific skill, and I call them movement patterns. So factors that affect the input include the strength of the cue, so it might be a weak signal that you might pick up, or it might be quite a strong signal. The speed of the cue, so the functioning of the sensory organs. So quite frankly, if you are unable to see or hear a particular cue, then you're obviously unable to react on it. An arousal level is also an interesting one as well. So if you're highly aroused, that can often mean that perhaps you might be stressed, or perhaps you might have a high level of anxiety, and consequently you might decide to react to a cue and use a particular movement pattern that might not be necessary within that part or within the dynamics of that game or that part of the game. And if you have low arousal levels, then once again you might not be able to pick up on those important cues that help us to then make a decision about an appropriate movement pattern to use. Another important one to look at as well is the level of noise. So when I talk about noise, I don't mean noise. I mean distractions within a game. Okay, so if you've got lots of different distractions, you've got lots of different information sources, and sometimes it can be really hard for you to pick up on a particular cue that's going to help you to make the correct decision and use an appropriate movement pattern. That's often why you see younger, inexperienced players learning a skill isolated from a game situation. Okay, so they can really focus on the movement pattern rather than when to use that movement pattern within a game. Now, that can also be problematic because a skill is only a skill when it's used skillfully within the context of a game. So if you have players practicing digging to each other and practicing their digs isolated from a game, quite often they are unable to pick up within a game when to use a dig because they are unable to pick up on those particular cues. And once again, when to do a set or how to do a set with how much force to apply to the ball. That all comes again from cues, and cues that you often pick up within a game. A lot of coaches often wonder why their players can so skillfully set to one another and dig to one another during practice, during a skill duel practice, and then when it comes to the game, they're actually unable to perform that. It's because the coach has removed those cues. So the player is unable to pick up the particular cues that will help them to make a decision, which helps them to decide as to when they would use that particular skill. I hope I've still got you. If not, we'll go over it again on Wednesday and Thursday. Now we've got these translators that help us make sense of this information. So it's sort of like a filtering process, all right? So you're playing a game and you're getting lots of different information, lots of sensory overload, okay? It's like, wow, I've got all this information. Now we then rely on our translators to help filter out the information that we don't need in order for us to pick up on those particular cues which help us to make the right decision about which skill to use, which movement pattern to use. We have our decision making, so that's the player's ability to process these particular cues, and based on these cues, the player then understands which skill to use or which movement pattern to use within that particular context of the game. And the output, once again, is the skill. Okay, so that is the movement pattern. Okay, so now we are looking at feedback. So after the player has performed the skill, they will receive feedback. And when we talk about feedback, we're talking about knowledge of results. So if that particular movement pattern was successful within the context of a game. So that could quite simply mean if you are a goal shooter within netball and you go to shoot a goal, that you get it in. Okay, knowledge of results within the context of a game. And then we also have knowledge of performance. So say, for example, you might have gotten the goal. Woo, you got the goal, successful. But you know yourself that the movement didn't feel correct. Okay, so that's giving you feedback. Okay, I did get that goal, however, I could still improve my performance. Or quite frankly, knowledge of results could be, okay, you didn't get the goal in, however, in terms of the movement pattern, you thought it was quite successful. Okay, so they're two very different things. So knowledge of results, so the success within a game, and knowledge of performance, so how you personally went and how efficient that movement pattern was. So psychological, go back to here. So once the player receives their feedback, this consequently can then impact the input again. So the skill that they decided to use was successful, they might consequently decide to use that again. So say, for example, if a player were picking up, say, for going back to table tennis now, we're looking at the particular angle that the ball was coming towards them at, and they decided to use a backhand push, they then received the feedback, which indicated to them that that was the appropriate skill to use within the context. They then know, again, in the input phase, to pick up on that particular cue, being the angle of the ball, which will then, again, affect their decision. And they think, hey, I remember this happened once before. This ball was coming to me at this particular angle, and I decided to do a backhand push. I'm going to do that again. So it really sharpens this process. Or once again, if it was unsuccessful, they might then decide again, okay, last time when the ball was coming to me at that angle and I decided to use a backhand push, it was unsuccessful. Perhaps next time I might decide to do something else. So some psychological factors evident in skilled performance include signal detection, selective attention, so where you decide to focus your attention within the context of a game, because you know if you're focusing on this particular context of the game, you are able to pick up on very important skill cues which help you to make a decision, which then help you to use the correct movement patterns. Or anticipation. And then this is a really important one, anticipation. Okay, so say, for example, you're quite a skilled performer, you're quite high up, or you're competing at maybe club level. Over time, based on particular patterns that happen within a game, a player might move in a particular direction, and you have seen that so many times before that you can almost anticipate their next move, quite similar to the Ronaldo video we were just watching, okay? So players can actually start to anticipate, and once again, they are looking for particular cues. They are looking at particular cues, because these cues help them to anticipate what's going to happen next and what they need to do, what decisions they need to make, what movement solutions they will use in order to solve movement problems. And when we're looking at characteristics of a skilled performer, it's interesting. We're looking at how economic the person is in terms of conserving their energy. So they use less energy. And going back to our exercise physiology topics, when we're using less energy, it means that we have more energy to use later on. Our skilled performers have good technique, so that they're using smooth movements. They're adaptable, so they can work in lots of different conditions, with lots of different variables, lots of different game situations. They can anticipate what's going to happen within a game because they've seen it before. They're quite focused, so they know where to focus their attention. They know where to pick up particular cues in order to help them make a decision, which will then help them to select the appropriate movement pattern to use, and they're consistent. So now we're going to look at FIT's model of motor learning, or FIT stages of motor learning. So within our cognitive stage, we're very much at the beginning stage, so we're still really focusing and learning on the movement pattern and actually doing the movement pattern. Henceforth, the reason why you often see the skills being practiced isolated from the game situation. Okay, with our associative stage, it's where, yes, mistakes are still made, but the athlete can recognise the errors in their feedback, so within their knowledge of performance, and change that or refine that. And obviously they require a lot more practice. With our autonomous stage, the movements are far more smooth, mistakes are quite rare, and the athlete is able to pick up on those relevant cues which help to guide their performance or help them indicate to them as to which movement pattern to use. Okay, so going back to the information processing model and linking it with FIT's model of motor learning. Now, say for example we have Mr. Athlete A, Mr. Athlete B and Mr. Athlete C playing within a game situation. Okay, we still have all of these different information sources present. Okay? However, one of the fundamental differences between player A, player B and player C is that player C, autonomous player, is able to pick up on those appropriate cues which help them to make the correct decision about which movement pattern to use. Okay? Over here, at the associative stage, they're still trying to pick up on those cues and which cues are relevant. And then we have Mr. Cognitive A, who might be picking up on the wrong information sources and consequently using the wrong movement pattern within the context of a game. It's also really interesting that when we look at an autonomous player, I'm just going to rub this off, they are able to be skilled and perform at quite an elite level within a variety of different contexts. Okay, so with our cognitive player, so our beginner player, and with regards to our autonomous players, one of the main differences is because autonomous players are able to perform a particular movement pattern very smoothly, they're then at that stage where they can train in lots of different conditions, which include high levels of variability. Okay, so they're exposed to this situation, this situation, this situation, and within each of these different situations, there are lots of different information sources. But say, for example, our cognitive player over here, they're very much at that developing stage and they're still getting used to performing the movement pattern. So consequently, their coach might seek to reduce noise, so reduce distractions, and really focus on helping the player to be able to perform that movement pattern. So they're over here. Okay, so their coach might expose them to this type of game situation, which has all of these different information sources. Now, consequently, if the coach is only putting the player into this type of situation, they're only exposed to a certain number of information sources. Whereas a player over here at the autonomous stage, who's exposed to lots of different variable situations, if they see these situations happen within a game, they think, oh, okay, this has happened before, I remember what we did. So for example, in a situation over here, the player is able to pick up on key information sources that then help them to perform a movement pattern. Or say, for example, here, a player remembers a particular element of the game that was practiced during training, and they're then also able to pick up on key information sources. So the player is then quite skillful in lots of different situations of the game because they're able to pick up on these key information sources which help them to select the correct movement pattern to use. However, once again, a player over here who's only exposed to this sort of limited situation, which when we're talking about games, there's quite a high level of variability and complexity. So if you're only exposing your players to particular game situations, they're consequently only going to be able to pick up on those cues which are going to help guide their performance. But then, for example, in a game situation, when player A over here is exposed to all of these different situations, they're going to be quite confused as to which information cues to pick up on. Cool. Thank you.